Welcome to Autotown. From the factory floor to the C-suite to the dealership lot, everyone is welcome in Autotown, a place to go for insights and analysis of what's happening in the auto industry. I'm your host, Jamie Butters. Hey, I'm Jamie Butters. It's my honor to welcome you to Autotown. Autotown is your place for insights about the auto industry, representing all of its constituents. From the factory floor to the C-suite to the dealership lot, everyone is welcome in Autotown. Autotown is brought to you in part by Aumovio, a global top-tier auto supplier. Riding shotgun with me this week as my guest co-host is Lindsay VanHulle. She's a deputy editor at Automotive News, where she's covered auto dealers, retail technology, and General Motors. Now she's focusing on the challenging business of electric vehicles. Lindsay, welcome to Autotown.
Hi, Jamie. Glad to be here.
Good to see you. You know, a little later, we're going to stop at the coffee shop for a chat with cybersecurity experts Dariusz Mikulski and Jennifer Tisdale. And in the town hall segment, we're going to ask you what you all think about sports marketing. But first, Lindsay and I are going to take a quick drive around the block and talk about the latest in the industry. Lindsay, the EV market seems like it's still kind of staggering. Most automakers resemble the opponents that Mike Tyson talked about when he says everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. The end of support for making or selling EVs, along with the rising and volatile tariffs, has really reset expectations. And it's like brands are trying to figure out where the American consumer's head is and where their own industrial reality lies. You've been doing a lot of interesting work in this space. I love that Automotive News tracks electric vehicle registrations. It's so important to have a reliable count, even if it's a month and a half after the fact. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in the EV registrations and the market overall?
You know, what was really interesting is just to see what it's looked like so far this year. So when you look at April, which is the most recent month that we have data for, they were down 9.8% year over year. And obviously that shows, the market is still softer. It's still weaker than it was a year ago when we saw a lot of the pull ahead sales activity, people knowing that, at that point, April, the possibility that the tax credit could go away. There was discussion about it at that point. But when you look at how the rest of the year has gone, the trend's actually been improving. So, January registrations were down year over year 41%. In February, 37%.
Yep.
In March, 25%. And in April, 9.8%.
Yeah.
And so I think when you take that in totality, the analysts I talked to said, we're seeing this gradual inching up, this sense of maybe beginning to find its footing. It's stabilizing a little bit after the end of the tax credit. And I think when you look at that, that sort of seems, the market is still down, but it's down less. Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of suggests that there's this natural balance that's coming, this natural market that's evolving. And I think a lot of the automakers last fall said, we'll know by mid-2026 what that looks like. The tax credit will be gone for a while. People who want an EV will still buy one. And I think, the analysts that I talked to for that story said that might be what we're seeing is a beginning of that stabilization in that market.
Yeah, we're still going to get some pretty ugly comparisons, when we get to the late summer, that September when there was such a rush for EVs last year. But it is sort of stabilizing, and we'll figure. Of course, the thing is, you can't sell what you don't make. And a lot of the brands have really shifted their portfolios. We've seen some companies really dial back a lot of EVs, while a few have continued to push on. You've written about this a little. What's going on there?
We were kind of thinking about it initially as almost like, are there two strategies emerging? Are you either in or are you out? And I think the reporting turned out to be more nuanced than that. Mm-hmm. That it's not necessarily that an automaker is getting completely out. It's that they're changing the execution in the near term. And Ford's a good example of that. They announced they were going to discontinue the F-150 Lightning electric pickup, but it's not a sign that they're out of EVs. They're still working right now pretty heavily on that midsize EV pickup, on that new universal platform, really
trying
targeting—
to leapfrog the technology, really.
Yeah, and get it at that affordable price point, roughly $30,000, which would make a big difference, I think, without that $7,500 tax credit. And so, when I talk to analysts about the different strategies, it looks, some look like they're rolling out new EVs into a soft market, and you think, that on the surface, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and others that are pulling back completely. And the sense that I got from the analysts I talked to was it's more of a gauging of where you are in the market, what your exposure is. Is your EV so far down the development pipeline that it would be more expensive to cancel? Do you find that demand right now is just too soft, that it doesn't make any financial sense to bring these forward? Do you have a portfolio of internal combustion engine vehicles that you can lean on longer and generate the profits from the big SUVs and pickups that can maybe absorb some of the losses from the EV work?
Well, and you say big pickups. That's sort of, definitely GM, Ford, Stellantis. That's their business. But then you look at somebody like Toyota, long considered an EV laggard. While they were leaders on hybrids, they've been very cautious on EVs because they tend to not make money. And like I would say, if you're Toyota, if you sell 10 million vehicles a year, you can't lose $5,000 on each one. That's just not plausible. But here they are with like 2-3 new EVs. But I think it's one of those cases where, like you said, the development was well on down the path. Plus, they invested a lot in battery making capacity here in the U.S. I think they're at least trying to get some learnings out of it because they were so close. Like, let's go ahead and go for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because Toyota came up a lot as an example of a company that, to your point, had been seen as behind on EVs and now is really rounding out their multi-powertrain strategy. EVs are just one end of it, but they still have gas engines and they have a really strong hybrid portfolio.
Totally.
And when you see what other automakers are doing, those that are getting out of EVs for now might still be working on them down the road, but they're also pivoting a lot to hybrids. And I think we're seeing a lot more automakers embracing that kind of multi-powertrain approach, that if you want a gas engine, we have one. If you want an EV, we have one. And we have hybrids in the middle as sort of this bridge.
Yeah. And, some companies are better at making money on these than others. Generally, EVs are still not profitable for the automakers, but you've got these different timelines, especially regarding technology. You mentioned the Ford Universal EV platform trying to, bring out really a China-level efficiency. But the other thing I think is we're seeing some developments towards solid-state batteries, which I know seems like one of those technologies that's always out there, but there is progress being made. And that seems like one of those things that could shift the game to get more, to really make EVs truly cost competitive up front. And, so that their total cost of ownership math can work out better for people when they don't have a $10,000 or $20,000 battery.
And that's some of the work that's continuing, right? It's not just vehicles. We talked about Ford's platform, but there's a lot of battery work that's still ongoing, to your point. Solid state seems maybe a little bit further down the road, but you have companies like Ford and GM that are looking at lithium manganese rich. It's a chemistry that gets a lot of the range, but at a lower price. And really targeting that battery cost is a way to bring down that overall cost.
Yeah, and sodium GM is looking at now, which, gosh, if you could make batteries out of salt, there's plenty of salt. Like, that would be really great. So
a lot of that work is definitely still happening.
Yeah. So more to come in the EV technology space. One group that tends to a little bit of a pivot here, but one group that generally doesn't love EVs, at least if there aren't a bunch of new jobs behind it, is the UAW. Your colleague Michael Martinez, who joined me earlier this month on the radio show of Autotown on WJR, he reported on Shawn Fain's reelection efforts and some of the opposition. It looks to me like he's really kind of running on his record, especially the 2023 contracts with the Detroit Three. Like, I got you historic wins, and I'm the best person to fight for you, with the emphasis on fight. What do you think? What's your recollection on Shawn Fain?
In 2023, I was covering GM at Automotive News, and so I was involved in our coverage of the stand-up strike, as they called it. And it was really unprecedented in the sense that, the UAW was striking all three of the Detroit automakers at the same time. And it just hadn't been done that way.
Well, and with isolated plants to put the pressure on them without having hundreds of thousands of people being temporarily unemployed.
And every so often there would be a new plant that would be called in. And, it was interesting to see what the strategy was and ultimately, the pressure that it put on the automakers. And ultimately, I mean, they were able to make pretty significant gains in those contracts.
Historic.
Yeah. And it led to, I think, an interest, at least among the UAW, to really push now into the South, where it's been a lot harder to organize. And, they had that organizing win at Volkswagen. And that's the first time that a Southern auto plant has been unionized. And that effort, I think, has really been another sign, I think, for the UAW to say, we're able to make these gains for you, and this is what our strategy is going to be. It's been harder. I mean, they've tried some other plants, and it hasn't been as successful. But I know that that's still a really big effort for them.
Yeah, his track record's been kind of a mixed bag since then. They did organize Volkswagen in Chattanooga, but they lost at Mercedes in Tuscaloosa and can't even get a vote at Toyota. So and then it took more than a year to get that contract at Tennessee. But I think it worked out well for him. There was the brief strike against Dow Corporation, the former American Axle. So, but also some turbulence, with the Federal Monitor. We'll see. Vice President Rich Boyer seems like an interesting contender, but we'll see. I guess the other thing I want to remind people, this is only the second time in recent decades that members have directly elected their leaders. Voting is done by mail. It should start in August and wrap up in early October. Next up, we're going to stop at the coffee shop to chat with a couple of experts on cybersecurity. And we'll go to the town hall to discuss this week's poll. That'll be after this. Welcome back to Autotown. I'm Jamie Butters. Riding shotgun as my co-host is Lindsay VanHulle, deputy editor at Automotive News. We're stopping at the Autotown coffee shop to chat with cybersecurity experts Dariusz Mikulski and Jennifer Tisdale. Dr. Mikulski is lead research scientist for ground vehicle robotics at the U.S. Army DevCom Ground Vehicle Systems Center in Warren, Michigan. Jennifer Tisdale is a cybersecurity strategist who brings together the automotive, defense, manufacturing, and government sectors. They are co-chairs of the Cyber Physical Systems Security Summit, CPS3, which was last week at Oakland University here in Metro Detroit. It's a conference dedicated to security across defense, automotive, advanced manufacturing, energy, and critical infrastructure. Maybe for starters, could you unpack the name a little? What are cyber physical systems and what is the state of their security? Dariusz, you want to start?
Sure. A cyber physical system, you can think of it as a device that's controlled by a computer, but it's a device that has some sort of an impact on the real world. So these can be things as small as medical devices, such as pumps, medical pumps that, have sensors that detect certain levels of something in your body and pump in medication. It could obviously be larger things like automotive vehicles, cars, trucks, drones, and even more expansive like power systems, power plants, water treatment centers, factories. For example, Amazon. They have robots that are moving around different kinds of packages. And making sure they get to the right spots. Those are all cyber physical systems. And the thing that we are concerned about from a cybersecurity perspective is they're potentially vulnerable because of that potential access to the internet and the fact that they can have a physical impact on something. It's different than maybe your traditional cybersecurity threat where you might lose data. You might lose maybe some money. You might, it can be an inconvenience.
Mm-hmm.
With a cyber physical system. There's a potential that you could, hurt somebody or maybe even, lose life. So it's a completely different kinds of threat. And what we're learning is that a lot of foreign adversaries are trying to pre-position themselves in these cybersecurity systems to potentially, wait for that magic signal to do something nefarious. And that's the kind of stuff that we want to talk about and try to prevent.
There's a lot of debate lately about China and other countries and their connected car hardware and software. We know there are government rules out there that target software and hardware and connected vehicles coming up in future model years. How do you see that cyber risk in terms of the physical operation of vehicles and also with the consumer data and just general surveillance? Jennifer, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll start. And I'll start from the automotive industry perspective. We need to do more in terms of understanding the traceability of the software in our vehicle platforms. And it doesn't matter initially where it's coming from, but it is especially important if it is coming from somebody we deem a foreign adversary. And so to be able to understand, the software bill of materials that are in each of the vehicles, like a packing list, right, of software components and who and where they're being supplied from, to be able to understand commercially so that we can protect our systems and our data. I would venture to say maybe the auto industry is less about the vehicle as much as it is about the data and connectivity today, because data is king with software-driven vehicles and soon AI-driven vehicles. But on the military point of view, the government point of view, I think it becomes increasingly imperative to understand software and hardware origin points and what the threat mindset might be behind those suppliers. So we are seeing a big push in both capacities, commercial and militarily, to understand the traceability of the software, to be able to provide insurance and assurance that we are not only protecting the vehicle and the connected environment it's operating, but the people inside of it as well.
It just seems like such a impossible challenge. Like, to get, you mentioned automated driving and, the connected world we live in now, with whether it's our phones or, our cars, they're trying to build systems, to integrate the Internet of everything kind of thing. But, to really be connected to stoplights and emergency vehicles, to have the efficiency gains of that, it seems like your car is then always spewing out information that anyone could just gather up and use for whatever purposes.
I mean, in some ways, I think it's really exciting, the convenience of it all, right? That is a data exchange, and I'll let Dr. Dariusz get into the depths of the technical for you. But when I worked for an auto OEM, I led R&D for cyber products, which is the vehicle fleet. And some of the conversations we were having at that time was, how can we create revenue off that data exchange? So in your nav system, if I know that Jen Tisdale stops at Starbucks, I'm going to reroute her by the most convenient Starbucks to her destination point, right, in hopes, right? And there would be almost like an advertisement payment between the OEM and, in this case, Starbucks. It's not a free promo for Starbucks.
Could be any brand.
Unless you're a sponsor. But I think that, we're really seeing some of the blossoming advantages of technology, but with every advantage, there is also a disadvantage. And that's really where we come into play, is having the conversations around how do we better secure ourselves and the society we live in from any technological threat, security threat. And that's the physical element, that intersection between the two.
Yeah, I think like on the privacy side, it comes down to the question of who owns the data. You're seeing this kind of trend in the automotive industry where, they're kind of killing vehicle ownership and moving towards this trend where, you're going to be, subscribing to different features. And in the process, they're going to be collecting data, and then where does that data go? It may be sold to a data broker, and that data broker may sell it to whoever they want, which could be one of our foreign adversaries. And I think that's kind of one of the big concerns. I think privacy obviously for consumers is a big deal, but some of these systems, especially in the vehicles, they may also have controls. Where somebody from the automotive company may be able to come in and do things to your system that you don't really expect. For example, in 2027, there's a mandate coming out to introduce a kill switch for people that are detected to potentially be inebriated. Going to be using infrared cameras within the vehicle and to detect their posture, their behavior, and infer whether they are safe to drive. And on the surface, sounds like a great safety feature. You're going to keep drunk drivers off the road. But at the same time, those are cameras looking at you, monitoring you constantly within your vehicle. And where's that data going to go? Is that going to end up going to your insurance company and they're going to change your premiums as a result? These are really, from a consumer standpoint, those are really important questions to answer, I think. And we need to be thinking about that stuff.
And you mentioned, you said, this assumption that the data belongs to the consumer, but even if it does, even if we accept that, it's still out there. It's still in the other systems that we're trying to use. And we saw a few years ago a big ransomware attack in the auto retail world. And it just puts so many, potentially thousands or millions of people's data vulnerable. And of course, the working systems that companies need in order to do their jobs.
Exactly. And yeah, and that's another thing that we sometimes also forget about is the supply chain. We think about the device itself, the cyber physical system, in this case, the car, but there's a whole behind the scenes, a supply chain, a hardware supply chain, a software supply chain. And those things also need to be, secure because, again, a foreign adversary can get in through there and then somehow introduce a backdoor that even the main automotive company may not be aware of.
You just had a big event we mentioned at Oakland University, but you have another one coming up later this summer?
Yeah, NDIA is a nonprofit. It's the National Defense Industrial Association. We host multiple events throughout the year, but our next event is upcoming in August at the Vibe Showplay Center. I don't know if that's the correct actual name of it, in Novi in August, right? And that is the Ground Vehicles Systems and Electronics and Technology Symposium, which talks about cybersecurity as one of the tracks, but all of the mechanics of the ground vehicle systems and the operational needs of those vehicle platforms for the military. So about 2,000 attendees, not just from Michigan, but from across the country and around the world, that are supporting the military and ground vehicle systems. A good portion of those people come from automotive, whether they actively work there or not. They're systems engineers, electronic engineers, and mechanical engineers primarily. And happy to say that we've had an uptick in the number of computer science engineers that now attend to contribute to the cybersecurity research of those platforms as well. So convening with technical white papers, education, awareness, but most importantly, problem solving for the military as well through technology.
Yeah, well, if you're talking about vehicles that operate on the ground, this is the place to do it.
No better place than here in Michigan, for sure.
For sure. Jennifer Tisdale, Dariusz Mikulski are co-chairs of the Cyber Physical Systems Security Summit and both involved with NDIA. Thank you both for visiting Autotown.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Hey, and hear ye, welcome to the Autotown Town Hall. Live sporting events are often considered among the only things that people watch and can't fast forward through the ads, making them coveted opportunities for companies selling insurance, beer, and, of course, autos. But is it worth it? Autotownies, what do you think about sports marketing for auto brands? Is it necessary for reaching shoppers when they might be in market? Is it valuable for long-term brand positioning? Or is it a waste of money that should be spent elsewhere? Lindsay, what do you think? First blush here.
I can totally see the brand, long-term brand awareness piece, right? I mean, I think when you think of like the Super Bowl of biggest sporting events, I mean, what better time do you have people who have your eyeballs on your brand? And there's no way to know at that moment if they're in market or not, but you're out there, you're getting your name out there, people are able to associate you with the event, and it's just a way to capture, an audience that, you want to be in front of.
It's so hard for me to tell. Having covered this industry for almost 30 years, I'm so hyper aware of auto brands wherever they are, although they also just sometimes become part of the sea of data and images that we see all the time. So I always wonder, like with normal people who are not automotive journalists, does it matter that Kia and Hyundai have their names all over the World Cup? Do they notice it this month? Will it stick with them next month?
I haven't seen data on that, and I think it would be really interesting to know, just what that impact is. I mean, when I think about the work I did covering kind of retail tech advertising, I mean, a lot of times dealers would say, you do television, but there was no way to know at that moment, who saw it and were they in market, and did it ultimately end up leading to someone walking into your dealership? And I would have to think it's similar. But, you also think about just kind of getting your name out there. I mean, ultimately, that's where you want to be. And so does that person, when they get in market for a vehicle, think, oh, yeah, this is the brand that I know, and it just kind of reaffirms that for me?
Well, and now there are some firms, I think EDO is one that will actually look at real-time responses when you run an ad for your brand. How does your search traffic surge? So A lot of interesting data behind all that stuff. And I can't wait to see what everyone thinks out there in the audience. Please go to the Autotown with Jamie Butters LinkedIn page to cast your vote. You can leave a comment, and I may read it on the air this Saturday morning. Autotown Radio is every Saturday at 7 a.m. on WJR 760. Thank you all for visiting Autotown today. Thank you to Lindsay VanHulle, Dariusz Mikulski, and Jennifer Tisdale for joining me. This show is produced by Matthew Peach at M1 Studios. Original artwork is by Shelley Trombley. Maya Keener is on social media. The theme song bangs. It was composed by Jonathan Franco. And thank you to Stellantis for the Hemi engine exhaust notes that are part of it. A very special thank you to our sponsor, Aumovio, a top-tier auto supplier. If your business is interested in becoming a sponsor, please contact Autotown's executive producer, James Davies. You can be an active citizen of Autotown. Follow the show on LinkedIn to participate in the weekly poll. You can also follow Autotown on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, wherever is your favorite social network. Audio can be found on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And of course, you can visit Autotown every Saturday morning at 7 a.m. on 760 WJR in Detroit. I'm Jamie Butters.